Hey, welcome. In this explainer, we're diving into a guide that's all about how to spot false teachings from a Christian viewpoint. We're going to look at the key signs, the characteristics, and the big red flags that the source material lays out, giving you a really clear framework for discernment. So let's jump right in.
So the source material kicks things off with this really powerful image, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And this pretty much sets the stage for everything we're about to cover. It's all about a hidden danger, right? Something that looks harmless, maybe even good, but underneath it's actually incredibly destructive.
All right, so first things first, we need to get on the same page about what we're actually talking about. This first section is going to break down exactly how our source defines this whole idea of false teaching.
Okay, this is a really critical distinction the source makes right at the beginning. We're not talking about someone making an honest mistake or having a simple misunderstanding. The source says even the best teachers can do that. No, it defines false teaching as an intentional, deliberate pattern of deception, usually for personal gain, that pulls people away from what the Bible actually says. So, to make this idea a little less abstract, the source gives us some specific examples. It points to a few groups that, while people might associate them with Christianity, actually hold theological beliefs that the source describes as being fundamentally different. So here are the four main examples cited in the text. And it's really important to remember we're presenting these exactly as the source material categorizes them. It uses these groups to highlight what it considers major doctrinal differences from traditional Christianity. This table really lays out the distinctions the source draws with Mormonism. Just look at that first row, nature of God. It's contrasting the traditional Trinity, one God in three persons, with the LDS belief in a Godhead of three totally separate beings. The source also points to big differences in Scripture, noting that Mormonism adds the Book of Mormon and other texts to the Bible as authoritative. And we see a similar breakdown here for Jehovah's Witnesses. A central difference the source highlights is the rejection of the Trinity. And notice the view of Jesus, not as being equal with God, but as God's first creation, even identified as Michael the Archangel. The view of the afterlife is another major point of difference that the text really zeroes in on. Okay, so we've looked at specific groups. Now the source zooms out to look at the bigger picture. It starts to describe these universal traits that it says are common to all false teachers, no matter what their specific background is. This is all about identifying patterns of behavior. So the first big one, they twist Scripture. The source gives the example of the health and wealth gospel, where it says teachers will cherry-pick verses about God's blessings to promise followers money and success, but they'll conveniently ignore all the parts about suffering for your faith. So it's not just about what they say, it's about what they leave out.
Next up, motivation. The source argues that you can spot a false teacher by what drives them. Is their main goal to serve God, or is it to build their own empire? Getting more money, more power, or just a massive following? The text describes them as being way more concerned with what people think than with what God thinks.
Now this next one, the source says this is a huge theological red flag. It says a common thread is that they chip away at the core identity of Jesus, specifically the idea that he was both fully God and fully man. And why is that such a big deal? Because that doctrine is seen as the absolute foundation of the Christian faith. Denying it is a massive warning sign.
And this brings us to their personal life. The text makes it clear that a teacher's life has to match their message. It brings up that biblical idea of knowing them by their fruits, basically saying that if their lifestyle is full of hypocrisy, greed, or sin, that will eventually tell you everything you need to know about their teaching.
So what's the end result of all this? According to the source, it's that people are actually led away from a godly life. By telling people exactly what they want to hear, everything's fine, you're doing great, and avoiding tough topics like sin, these teachers create this dangerous sense of spiritual comfort and complacency.
So, we've gone through the characteristics, but what does this stuff actually sound like day to day? Well, the next part of the source gives us a handy list of specific phrases and ideas that it says should make your ears perk up.
Think of this as a kind of field guide to red flags. According to the source, each one of these statements, that Jesus is just one path among many, or that the Bible is just a suggestion box, or that God's main goals are earthly happiness, each one pushes back against a core biblical teaching. The source flags all of these as major warning signs.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problem, the signs, and the red flags, but what's the solution? Well, the source doesn't leave us hanging. This final section offers up what it calls a spiritual toolkit. Basically, a set of practical steps you can take to guard against deception.
And here is that practical advice laid out so clearly. Step 1 is proactive. Just know the real thing so well that a counterfeit becomes immediately obvious. The other steps are about how you react. You test what you hear, you look closely at the teacher's life, and finally, you have the courage to actually challenge what's false. It's a pretty comprehensive defense strategy.
This verse right here, this is what the source holds up as the gold standard. It's praising the people of Berea not just for being open-minded, but for being diligent fact-checkers. They listened eagerly, but then they went home and searched the scriptures daily to see if what they were being told was actually true. It really drives home that theme of personal responsibility.
And all of this brings us to one final thought. The source gives us a powerful spiritual framework for finding the truth. But let's be real. We live in an age of constant information overload, with voices coming at us from social media, the internet, everywhere. So the question is, how do these principles apply today? What tools, whether they're ancient or modern, are the most essential for all of us to sort through the noise? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for watching.